So I want to ask you a question. How safe are you? In 2018, I was in a coffee shop in central London. It was pretty empty. It was myself and one other person. It was really, really quiet. No one else was there. The guy started making weird exhaling sounds. He was a well-dressed man in his 40s, and he kept making these weird exhaling sounds coming from behind me. Now, I had these headphones on, so the sounds were getting louder and louder. And I thought, what's wrong with him? And then he stood up and he tried to steady himself. And then he fell to the floor, smacking his head on the table leg as he landed. Blood gushed from the back of his head. He was unconscious. I stood up and I called for an ambulance and I knelt next to him. He was breathing. But my adrenaline started kicking in. My stomach felt sick. I thought I was going to faint. I reminded myself, just keep breathing. Because he was breathing, I put him in the recovery position to make sure that he was safe. The emergency services arrived and he was taken to hospital. So what allowed me to respond so quickly in that situation? How did I know what the recovery position was? Well, I'm a trained first aider. I used to compete in life-saving as a sport. I was actually the British champion in 2003. I'm essentially a Scottish David Hasselhoff. In situations, we can agree when someone's physical safety is at risk, we can take immediate action. But what about in situations where mental health safety is at risk, when someone's psychological safety is in question? Do you know what to do? I'm an engineer, and safety is drilled into us as part of our culture, as part of the design, the operate, the commission, the build, the decommission process. Every part of that process, safety is paramount. And in high-risk working environments, standards and rigors are even greater. Let's look at the Bradley curve. This was developed by DuPont and is used in engineering to map out safety culture. We have injury rate slowly reducing over time as a culture becomes more together. In stage one, it's reactive. We react to risks because our natural instincts want to keep us safe. In stage two, culture is dependent. We are told that safety is a priority by supervision. In stage three, culture is more independent. We proactively prioritize safety for ourselves because we care about our self-preservation. Self-preservation becomes part of our practice, our habits. And in stage four, we have an interdependent culture. We look out for one another. We care for people in our teams. In engineering, we have a big male majority organization. We have big male majority industry. And minoritized groups are on the receiving end of microaggressions frequently, more often than privileged majority groups. And what about in situations where mental health safety is at risk? What if someone is in a mental health emergency? If they're having a panic attack, a breakdown, using suicidal language, would you know what to do? Imagine this. You're on a construction project, working away from your family for a long time, good few months, and the project is behind schedule. A group of your male colleagues in the canteen start getting rowdy. You've recently lost a family member to suicide. The content of the exchange gets more and more inappropriate. Their bullish behavior becomes more and more inappropriate, and they start talking about the topic that led your family member to suicide. Imagine how you feel. What do? Do you call it out? Do you stand up? Do you tell them how you feel? Privilege is defined as a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular group or person. Psychological safety is being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. Majority groups have strength in numbers, and minoritized groups are less likely to call out overt acts of bullying, harassment, for fear of retribution. So privilege is psychological safety. How many times do you not intervene in an altercation for fear of being perceived as the political correctness police? Or perhaps you don't intervene because you fear for your own personal safety. If the situation looked like it could turn violent. You have to feel safe in order to speak up. So inclusion is psychological safety. The example I've given is commonplace in our male majority sector. In the construction, manufacturing, and process industries, men are statistically more likely to die through suicide than a typical hazard like a dropped object falling from height or electrocution. So inclusion and belonging is a health and safety issue. And if the intention of our inclusion and belonging programs is to create a place where you can be your whole self, bring your whole self to work, as we often claim, then we're failing this male majority if they're not being able to be open about any root causes of what's going on in their mind and open about their mental health. We need more psychological safety, and we fundamentally need to rethink what we're doing on our diversity and inclusion programs and how we engage this white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied male population. Because right now, our current method is not working and people are dying. Our EqualEngineers Masculinity and Engineering research found that 1 in 5 engineers had lost a work colleague to suicide. This research was done in 2018. Look at that number. 1 in 5 engineers lost a work colleague to suicide. And then when it became personal, 1 in 5 had had suicidal ideation or had self-harmed. 20%. Men were 3.5 times more likely to answer yes to that question than women. And in the 2021 post-pandemic refresh of this research, the numbers went up again. 1 in 4 engineers reported self-harm or suicidal ideation. So I'll repeat it because it's important. We need more psychological safety, and we fundamentally need to rethink what we're doing on inclusion and belonging and how we link it to our health and safety management systems. I'm a gay man, and I grew up with internalized homophobia and shame. And the antidote to shame is pride, something that the LGBTQ+ community has adopted historically. Growing up, I had moments where I thought I wouldn't fit in as I got older. Would I have to run away in order to live a happy life? Would my family still love me in the event I came out. And shame is one of the most painful things a person can feel. And when you're in a minoritized group and have intersectional identities, then the statistics, they stack up even greater. Men can feel blamed and shamed for not supporting these communities. So I'll ask you, how can we transform not just our workplace culture, but our culture in general, so that we create a place where we can all thrive and all give our best, where we can go home safe to our loved ones? Well, I think there are things that we can learn from the Bradley curve and engineering success in safety management of physical safety risks. So let's go back to the Bradley curve. I'll recap. Here we have injury rates reducing with time. So essentially less people being harmed as culture improves. What if we took this model and we looked at it through a lens of psychological safety? What if we used psychological safety to create inclusive cultures? What if creating inclusion and belonging is as simple as making people feel more emotionally and mentally safe? Let's consider adding a stage 5 to this curve. I call it inclusive interdependence, which leads to safe teams. Inclusive interdependence, it's a place where inclusion just happens so naturally. It's just so ingrained into what we do. You don't have to keep thinking about these micro decisions to be a good person, to be an ally for this group or be an ally for that group. You know, you're just doing it. It's a new way for the collective. And I believe it is achievable with the proper systems in place. We fundamentally need to open up more. We need to ask more questions. We also need to share our own personal stories. We need to emotionally connect with our own diversity story and know what our difference is that we have to share with the world. Even if you're white, even if you're male, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, and in the upper age bracket of your life. Everyone has a diversity story to share. And it can be as simple then as being an advocate for the psychological safety of someone, rooting in on your own empathy. It's simple. If we look out for the psychological safety of everyone and everyone feels psychologically safe, then we can save lives. I'll conclude with a short story. I was at a railway depot in London. I was delivering my training session on creating inclusive cultures to the usual all-male team of engineers. Body language was closed. Arms were closed. Participants were unreceptive. We discussed the impact that the negative banter, which is so prolific on the shop floor, the impact that that can have in the workplace. One of the group shared that their brother, who was an apprentice at the organization, didn't come out, so he was gay, he didn't come out until he moved to another department. He didn't feel safe in that group of guys because their banter sometimes anchored on making gay jokes. And so he didn't feel like he could be his true self. Now, the guys thought they had a good relationship with him, so they were visibly upset. You could see that the impact, they were now aware of the impact that this language, the negative language, had had on their colleague. Sometimes it's not psychologically safe to come out. But we agree that physical safety warrants taking immediate action if someone is at risk. But actually, how often are we in situations where there is a whole load of invisible things going on in people's minds around us that we're not tuned into? How can we ensure the psychological safety of everyone? We need to create a space where we engage, because often we don't engage. We don't pay attention. We're unaware. We're living in our own world. We need to wake up. We need to learn what it's like to walk in the shoes of others so that we can learn others' perspectives. We need to listen non-judgmentally and hear one another. Not listen with the intent to reply, but actually stop, tune out, tune in to what the individual's saying and engage and listen. That is the cornerstone of empathy. And I believe it is possible to instill pride, to engineer community, and to engineer connections together, and ultimately build safe teams. So I ask you again, if you're not looking out for the safety of others, are others looking out for the safety of you, physically and psychologically? And if you're not looking out for others, then how safe does that make you feel? Thank you.